I'm AJ Gutierrez, the co-founder of Saga Education and host of EdHeads. This season, we've been talking with leading experts about AI in education. This special compilation episode highlights what our guests think district leaders need to know about harnessing the power of emerging technology to enhance human connection. This is EdHeads. What opportunities do you see for district leaders? Like, how do they navigate through the noise?
If we just focused on a few powerful tools, it relieves stress for the educator and increased opportunity for the student. But it had to be a democratic experience. We had to bring the educators around the table, have the conversation, start with the opportunities. And recently I've tried to move from challenge language to opportunity language because just trying to be better at positive framing. So what are the opportunities? And then reframe that way and focus. And that takes time. And that's hard to do, especially in the lens of everything we have to do as district leaders. But at the end of the day, the value is and the opportunity is huge.
Well, this has been tremendously enlightening. Thank you so much for your time, Jenny.
Thank you so much for having me.
What do you think is really important for a district leader to know about artificial intelligence? Kind of what are the types of technologies that currently exist that they should be aware of?
I think there are a few things to really know. One is that we all use AI every day, even if we don't know that we're using AI. So for example, if you unlock your phone in the morning, you used AI to do that. If you do a Google search, you've used AI to do that. If you are looking at, what's your team's chances of winning in the game tonight, you're using AI to do that. And so AI is already a key part of all of our lives. And so we're using it in various different contexts. What's interesting is that I think there's a lot of emphasis right now on generative AI, but that's only one of the types of AI that's out there. And there are three key problems that are being solved by AI. One is prediction. So you'll see this, for example, if you go look up a sports game on ESPN, it'll tell you, the Boston Celtics have a 53% chance of winning tonight, for example. That's using prediction and taking data and trying to predict what the outcome is going to be. A second is classification AI. And so this is if you go and on Google look up pictures of a rabbit. Google can take different pictures and figure out, hey, this picture has a rabbit in it. And so that's a picture of a rabbit. That's an example of classification. That's probably the most widely used AI that's out there. And the newest is generative AI, where it's actually creating new information. And that is something that we're seeing with things like ChatGPT that's out there. But I think people need to understand that there are different types that are out there. The other thing I think folks need to understand is AI is an incredibly powerful technology that needs to be used very responsibly. And so what I would encourage district leaders to think about are really three questions that they ought to ask when using any piece of AI. One is there bias in this AI? What is the data that is based on, and is it actually representing the students that I'm trying to serve? The second is accuracy. So AI is a probabilistic algorithm. AI is basically all it is very, very, very fancy statistics. That's essentially all AI is. It's predicting, okay, what's the next thing I should show this user? So inherently, it's going to be wrong some percentage of the time. So how do you deal with it when it's wrong? How can you put a person in the loop, for example, a teacher, and empower a teacher as opposed to just going directly to students? And so that's a key thing. And then third is unintended consequences. And we see this in a variety of places in the industry where, AI can be used in places that could be dangerous. And so really understanding kind of what might happen.
When it comes to bias and mitigating bias, and I'm a district leader and I'm asking a company what they do to mitigate bias, what are some best practices you think companies should be doing to decrease the likelihood of those types of unintended consequences?
I think number one is using representative data sets. If you use a data set that's skewed in a particular direction, then it could be completely unrepresentative and be very harmful. I'll give you an example of this. You can build an algorithm in a different industry, you can build an algorithm to approve a loan for somebody. But if you just use, what's happened in the bank of what's gotten approved and what's not, you're encoding that bias into the algorithm. And there's a tendency when it's coming from an algorithm for people to believe it more than if it's just coming from a human. And so as a result of that, you end up encoding that bias and propagating that bias. If you have the right data set, you could take that same use case and actually open up loans to many, many more people. And so the same thing is true with education, which is look at, are there representative data sets being used to be able to create this? The second is, what levers do you have to really kind of tune the use of AI to the student? And so a lot of companies, just like we're doing this, is to try to figure out how do you empower the teacher who knows the classroom the best to figure out what kind of data to put into this and how best to use it with the students. And I think that's a key thing. How do you empower the teacher who has the knowledge of the context of the students in the classroom and empower them to be able to be the quarterback on how their students are using AI?
What are the opportunities for district leaders and educators to use artificial intelligence in supporting kids?
Products like ours, which can really differentiate learning for each student and can empower the teacher in the classroom to differentiate learning for their students. And so this can make it so that every student has a one-on-one type of experience and gets the learning that they need, because the needs of every student is going to be slightly different. From a district perspective, you can use AI to be able to analyze the data that you have. So be able to figure out, okay, what students might be at risk? How are students doing in general? What are their biggest needs? You can do that with the aggregation of data. And that's kind of, using some of those predictive analytics that I was talking about before. Those are areas where I think AI can really help districts and make it such that it makes the job of administrators as well as teachers and students easier.
It's a really important message from our discussion today, is that we have to do this in partnership with school districts and with teachers. We are not just entering the future, like we're building it together.
Yeah.
And this is a message of empowerment to teachers and district leaders. You even found firsthand, like even our teachers are better coders than programmers on effective AI instruction.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important message for a lot of folks to hear. And if folks are interested in maybe getting involved with you, like how can they go about doing that?
You just go to chironlearning.com. You can go and use our lessons, or you can go and create your own. And so we have the ability for people to do that. And I think that, just to double down on what you said, in this journey for starting Chiron Learning, I've built such a respect for educators and administrators in education, and how tough a job they have, but how good they are at the art of doing their job. And I think our goal as a society needs to be to figure out how do we empower them to do what they're doing, because they're amazing artists at what they do.
From a district leader's perspective, how should an educator go about measuring or taking a step forward and looking at security and data interoperability? What are some of the metrics that and support you're providing Innovate EDU to support district leaders with that?
So data interoperability in education is our oldest alliance at Innovate EDU. It's called Project Unicorn. Not because it'll never happen, but because I think when you have data interoperability, it can be magical for your school or district. And so through Project Unicorn, we offer technical assistance for not just districts, but also for vendors. So Project Unicorn community is almost 900 school districts who are actively receiving technical assistance and support, and over 300 vendors. So again, like holding the supply and demand side together to make those pipes work to get us the hot showers. We also do something called the State of the Sector report every October, and the School System Data Survey. So the School System Data Survey is happening right now this spring, and districts can take this survey, and it takes about 20 minutes, and then they get a customized assessment of where they are for free around data interoperability. What domains should they think about looking at? Sometimes it's data governance, sometimes it's leadership, sometimes it's technical infrastructure. But data interoperability isn't a technical problem. It's often a business problem in districts. And so it's about bringing teams together, uncommon alliances, even in the district, to help people understand what are they measuring, how could they measure, and how do they bring that together. And so then in October, we take the results of that school system data survey and we deliver a state of the sector report, which follows some of our partners' work, whether that's at CCSSO or COSIN or CGCS, and says these are all organizations that do work at the intersection of data interoperability and education. And then the state of the sector report sort of says, this is where we are, this is how much we've grown, this is how much we have to do, and this is where we need to make investments. And that rowing together of all these organizations through Project Unicorn, the standards bodies, the research, the data, the technical assistance, the supply side and demand side, has meant that right now, I think we have an unprecedented opportunity to look at data modernization in education with support from the White House. I mean, First Lady Joe Biden in August convened many of us along with 300 leaders from across the education space and stood up in the East Room of the White House and said, interoperability, cybersecurity, and privacy, we need to have these foundational layers to do everything else we want to do in education. And we owe that investment in infrastructure to our systems and to our schools, frankly, to our kids.
What do you think, like a district leader, how should district leaders start thinking differently? Do you feel like, where's the breakdown? Why do you think it took so long for that work with the evidence base around the science of reading? And this is actually relevant in the context of the rapid developments with technology. If we don't learn from that, I think we're can make that same mistake again. What do you think is necessary to change that paradigm?
So you almost said it there, which is like, how do we develop rapid feedback loops, right? How do we not just prize one type of research, just RCTs? Right. How do we have different types of research that can emerge to guide us? How do we better mobilize that knowledge? So it's not like the knowledge didn't exist. We failed to engage with it, mobilize it, and translate it. And frankly, like, I don't want any superintendent reading research studies. It's the researchers and the research industry's job to make that information digestible and practical. And so there's great work happening at IES around the practice guides. There's great work happening at the Institute for Education Sciences, IES, around the What Works Clearinghouse and revamping it. So it's not just built for researchers, but built for practitioners. But if we don't think about how to make research digestible, knowable, and actionable, then we're going to continue to have this problem. And I think Saga's done a great job at doing this, not to just toot your horn over at Saga, but you guys have done some great work around high dosage tutoring with the University of Chicago. And what I love about those reports is there's no one better than the University of Chicago for research. Well, maybe University of Michigan, but there's very few institutions who can meet that bar. But instead of just publishing a research study, which you guys have, you guys then I publish a set of like what I call like translation documents, things that de-jargonize, that demystify and say like, here's how to get started. Here's the things you can begin to do from a practical perspective. And we need to be doing way more of that translation in our sector, or we're not going to find ourselves able to take advantage of the opportunities that technology or an enhanced investment in R&D would provide.
If we do see this types of legislation pass, like the NEEDS Act, and what kind of opportunities do you think that will open up for district leaders?
One, it will be an unprecedented amount of financial resources to ed R&D. So in order to move movements, you got to grow the pie. You got to make sure that folks aren't fighting over a small pie. In order to have new actors and new folks come in, you have to grow the pie. And so it will grow the pie of resources. It will focus on how do we build a durable state and local infrastructure. It's not enough to invest in federal research. That will never move the needle. You have to build a state and local infrastructure so that research can be happening, evidence building, evidence generation can be happening in practice in every school district in this country. And that means we need to make some investments so that it doesn't just happen in the LAs and New Yorks and the Atlantas, the big ones, but it happens in Cannon City, Colorado, and Birmingham, Alabama, and other places where the diversity of the problem is going to be really important for us to understand what's happening across the space. And then, frankly, I think the NEET Act calls for something that is just fundamentally different. It's about those feedback loops. Too many times in education, we have an intervention or something we want to study, and then we have to wait 5 years to figure out if it actually had an effect. And often it's hard to discern in those types of randomized control trials or RCTs, whether it was the intervention or some other extra polarity that happened, a change in leadership, so on and so forth. So what would it look like to invest in vehicles that actually match the ESSA tiers of evidence, the Every Student Succeeds Act tiers of evidence? There's 4. And the highest tier is around RCTs, but there's 3 other tiers that include different types of research that could include, hypothesized research with just a logic model, a spark, an innovation that we think might change that might change something significantly, or something that we know isn't quite ready for an RCT, but we have enough causal evidence that we can begin to look at quasi-experimental designs. And so changing the type of research we're doing will also change the way we build knowledge and who we think are knowledge brokers. And so if we, again, expand the pie, we build a table that's more diverse, more inclusive, hopefully more community-centric, and doesn't just change what we're doing, but rapidly speed up the development of knowledge mobilization and new innovation in our space.
I'm a huge admirer of you and everything you've done, and look forward to continuing to work with you in the future.
Thank you.
Let's say you're a district leader in the U.S. and you're managing a large school system. Like, what role do you see these types of technologies like ChatGPT playing in the context of educational delivery in the long term? Like, what's the future of schooling from your perspective?
The big way of looking at it as a district leader is thinking you have a form of school and you've been optimizing on the form, but the shift is really to look at the function of school and to optimize on that function. Now, the challenge is going to be, how do I turn the Titanic? And the way that I would think about that is you put a small boat in the water. So you create these open innovation labs and experiences that allow you to do that. And instead of going to try and get everybody to convert to AI, as a district leader, I would look at how can I create these small experiments and how could I find the already converted teachers and say, what do we actually want to do? How do we want to prepare for the future? And can we make models that are compelling?
What should district leaders demand? Like, how do we empower district leaders? What should they demand so that they can have a greater seat in creating a giant leap forward in this concept of co-design in education?
So one of the best AI companies that I've seen so far is a company out of Australia and Singapore called Literatu. And they worked with educators for the last 7 years. They're an AI company for the last 7 years around writing. And they've created a platform that's now integrated into the Singapore SLS, which is their student learning space. And that platform, the entire AI is embedded into the platform, but they've worked with the AI plus the student plus the teacher to think about what's the best user experience to teach students how to write and create micro courses for themselves. And they've had a significant amount of success because they've taken their time to really sort of co-design this. And I think having that approach is really important, but not just teachers, but having the students involved. And not from a perspective of, purpose or interest, right? Some students have to have a purpose, or they, you have to, have them follow their passion. If I have limited experiences, I don't know what my passion is. I got into teaching, I didn't know that it would have been a passion, right? And I was 23 at the time, and my passion was like, when is the next party? As a district leader, I would really think of, if content is a commodity, then human becomes the premium. If human is the premium, then learning how to think and use mental models is the superpower. And if we can spend more time with that then we can go back and now look at the ed tech companies and say, let's go through this in sequence. The first order of business is we want the busyness out the way. The second order of business is we want to create more human connection. How do we do that? Now we have a different conversation versus, hey, I'm at one of the big tech firms and this is my experience in school, so I'm going to tell you what you need.
What are the top 3 considerations for district leaders so they can lead effectively in the context of this emerging technology?
So I think what district leaders need to focus on in terms of 3 steps is A, energize the overall population. So energize the students, energize the parents, energize the staff, right? And that energizer can come all in one place. It could come in a message, but that would be the first thing, to energize. The second thing would be to find a common north. Really understand, what is the job that we're trying to do? I'm, one that talks about unlocking stranded brilliance. That's a common north that I use and a lot of other schools have used as well. But what is that common north and how can we lock into that and understand what that means? And an extension of that then is to find principles based on that common north. And once we have the principles on that common north, then really work backwards to allow the schools and the students the flexibility to create protocols based on those principles.
Thank you so much for joining us. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
They would definitely find me on LinkedIn, Dwayne Matthews, OCT.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Follow us for more conversations with leading experts on AI next time on EdHeads.